privacy is, of course, top of mind as the House Financial Services Committee recently approved a bill meant to prevent a CBDC in the U.S. Congressman Patrick McHenry said one of the reasons was to, quote, protect Americans' privacy. Joining us now to discuss the state of financial privacy in the U.S. is NIM security consultant Chelsea Manning, along with NIM CEO Harry Halpin. Chelsea, wonderful to see you again. Harry, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Jen.
All right, let's dive into this. Chelsea, I'm going to direct this first question at you. Talk to us about the current state of financial surveillance here in the U.S. and abroad.
Oh, sure. So basically, we have had these countervailing winds between, the attempts at backdoors for encryption. This has been an ongoing debate since at least the 1990s, and really ramped up in the 2010s. But now it's involving, currencies and particularly digital assets and digital currencies. And so one of the things that we've seen both the push towards a central bank backed digital asset, in particular places like the United States and more so in Europe. But we've also seen sort of the countervailing force against that, the pushback against that. And we, whenever it comes to privacy and surveillance, and regulatory forces, the balance between, I have nothing to hide and I have to provide all of this information to the IRS anyway, versus, the fact that, sometimes the stuff gets used and abused. And especially with our transactions, being able to make predictions about things and be able to do things about the patterns of life and behaviors. Like, we've sort of seen this like countervailing opinion, especially among, privacy rights advocates who have been warning people for years that, we're going to end up in a situation where, and we've been here for a while, but, where our transactions, with credit card authorities and everything are used to essentially make life and death, or, life-changing decisions based on like where we can work and what we can do. But now it's a question of what, is it going to be a federal bank authority who's going to be able to go into a ledger and be able to track all of this stuff by default.
Harry, Chelsea just brought up CBDCs. We just mentioned the Anti-Surveillance Act. Congressman McHenry, of course, saying that this is to protect Americans. Do you think that this is enough from Congress to protect Americans?
Well, just to be clear, we at NIM are, of course, skeptical of CBDCs, but just because you don't have a CBDC doesn't mean that your financial transactions aren't being surveilled, right? So not having a CBDC just simply means they may not be centrally surveilled by, for example, the federal government, but essentially all financial transactions do go through currently banking level surveillance, and any transaction on a blockchain is effectively self-surveilled and transparent unless your blockchain is using some form of privacy enhancing technology. So of course, simply saying, CBDCs should not be used doesn't really tackle the core problem of financial surveillance. And the problem of financial surveillance is, even if people believe that financial surveillance can be used for good things, we're already, for example, reporting all this information to the relevant tax authorities, it still actually borders on a national security problem. Because what could happen is, for example, let's assume the United States made a CBDC, or even banks started using blockchain technology in general for payment rails. If you're, for example, the U.S. government, I would assume you'd be very concerned that if these financial transactions were on a transparent ledger of any sort, centralized or decentralized, they could be easily surveilled by, for example, the Chinese or Russian governments. So it's a real national security interest and a benefit to have privacy. The other thing, which I think people often aren't particularly aware of, is that even if you're not using a blockchain, even if you're not using a CBDC at all, the very fact that you're communicating, for example, over a web browser or an app or the internet, even with a certain encryption, that releases metadata about when you're transacting, who you're transacting with, and that information can be gathered regardless of a blockchain. And that's exactly what agencies like the NSA have been doing for a very long time.
So let's look at the flip side of this. Right now, Russia's prosecuting a war in Ukraine that's costing hundreds of thousands of lives, many of them Russian, actually, but also millions of refugees. North Korea is pursuing nuclear capabilities. And in both cases, we know that these are governments that are active in the cryptocurrency markets. They're active in money laundering using cryptocurrencies. Essentially, these the value in crypto is costing thousands of lives on a very real basis. What kind of safeguards is NIM providing to prevent this kind of transfer of value that ultimately will cause bloodshed on a very real basis in the streets of Ukraine right now? I'll give it to you, Harry, and then Chelsea.
Yeah. I mean, just to be clear, the majority of our users are currently in Ukraine because effectively what NIM provides, NIM is not a mixer like Tornado Cash. It does not make transactions, financial transactions, private. The way you want to think about NIM is what's called a mixed net. I know it's confusing, but a mixed net, you want to emphasize the second part of that word, which means network. And what a network is a collection of servers similar to, for example, VPN servers. And it sends packets to those servers. Those servers mix the packets up like shuffling a deck of cards. And then they send them to whatever the destination is. So what it means is that a adversarial third party cannot monitor that transaction. And then we allow the use of credentials, privacy enhanced authentication credentials for compliance purposes. For example, you can prove that you have a phone number at Signal. You can prove that you're an American, that you're not from North Korea. You can prove that you're not on the OFAC list, done KYC, AML compliance, and so forth and so on. I mean, as a Swiss company, we have to be aware of these and operate in a large number of jurisdictions. So the way you want to think about it is that effectively, NIM is not a financial transfer rail. We make the existing financial transfer rails private, not between you and me. I'm not trying to hide the money. I'm trying to make sure that third parties, anyone who I haven't authorized or don't have authorized access to that data can't just observe it without me knowing. So, for example, in the case of Ukraine, that's actually saving lives. It's very important because otherwise, we do have evidence with the New York Times recently that Russia is actually actively doing metadata analysis on the Ukrainian forces and military and financial transactions, talks who's in command, who's talking to who. This is a very general purpose problem. It's much larger than the financial transactions. And that's why there's, to our knowledge, we just did a train hackathon there 2 months ago. That's why there's interest in Mixnet technologies and NIM. You can also use for this very purpose something like a VPN or Tor. But the problem, particularly with VPNs, is how do you trust the VPN, right? Because they're centralized. So the VPN knows exactly who and what you're doing. And usually, for example, the US government, you would use, for example, a Cisco VPN. But that being said, I used to work for the French government. The French government has a Cisco contract, but doesn't particularly trust Cisco, perhaps to hand over sensitive French government or financial data to the US. So what we need in this space is a decentralized privacy enhanced Mixnet, which is what we provide, that offers the ability to disclose your information, including, KYC, AML information, whatever information to the relevant people that you choose, but not basically just let random people intercept your data and monitor your data. And that is actually, I think, very coherent with national security concerns and will save lives rather than cause them to be, hurt, basically.
Yeah, and just to clear up any confusion, Mixnet, the packets are agnostic about what is contained within the packets. So, we're not talking about specifically like transactions or anything like that. Like any kind of information, like private messages, emails, potentially even in the future, like web traffic, like actual, interacting over like an internet service, like with Tor and VPNs could be possible. So, the underlying technology has has a broader range of possible uses. And I think that is something that people intuitively understand at this point. That's why VPNs are popular. That's why, tools like Tor, rose in use in the 2010s, is that people do care about privacy. They do care about protecting their information. It's just that the abilities of these large actors to be able to decipher and disentangle this information have exponentially increased and have made those existing privacy tools less effective than they have been previously, as Harry just cited, with a particular example.
Chelsea, you very famously exposed human rights violations and ended up arrested for that in 2010 after providing data to WikiLeaks. If something like this existed back then, would that data have been untraceable? Could this help protect whistleblowers in the future?
It's hard to say, because obviously we're in a different era. It was a lot easier. It was a lot easier then to because the ability of surveillance actors was less capable than it is today. But I don't want to speculate on what is possible today. And now we're in a very different era where there's just so much information that it's actually disentangling whether or not information is accurate or not, as opposed to whether or not information can be made available to the public. The public has access to information, but now we have so many different, we have a broad spectrum of information sources, and it's become much more difficult to identify, which one, which is the valuable information. We essentially have a needle and haystack problem that is exponentially increasing in complexity and difficulty over time.
All right, Chelsea, Harry, we are going to have to leave it there. Thanks so much for joining us this morning and unpacking the future of privacy.
Thank you.
That was NIM security consultant Chelsea Manning, along with NIM CEO Harry Halpin.